Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to this week's version of KETIV's Autodesk Virtual Academy. My name is Marcella and I'm one of the customer success managers here at KETIV. And you are in the right place if you want to learn about the power of Inventor Shrinkwrap. Today, my colleague Justin Gao is going to be talking about this. Justin, how are you doing today?
Good. AVA, what's going on today? We have a good topic for you guys. Alrighty, let's go through it. So, a little background on myself. My name is Justin Gao, like Marcella said. I'm an application engineer here at KETIV. I primarily work on the delivery team, and what I do is I do a lot of content creation. So, content creation within Inventor, AutoCAD, Plant 3D, P&ID, pretty much any of the Autodesk collection, anything that's in there. I do a lot of the content creation for that. And I'm also working with the automation team here. I do a little bit coding on the background if you have any automation projects with us. Just trying to streamline your workflow a little bit better. We do that. And then I also do a lot of the iLogic configurations within your parts if you have any projects with us. A little background on myself as well. I'm a Cal Poly Pomona alumni. I graduated mechanical engineer major. So shout out Billy Bronco.
Is that a cowgirl?
Yeah, that's Cal Poly mascot right there, Billy Bronco.
Nice.
Alrighty. So like Marcella said, if you guys have any questions, feel free, put them in the chat, whether it's in YouTube, whether you're here on Zoom, go ahead and do that and then we'll get those answers for you. All right, so a little background on Shrinkwrap. You're going to see Shrinkwrap in the assembly level, and it has its own window under the assembly ribbon. So you have Shrinkwrap and you have Shrinkwrap Substitute under the simplification window right here. We're gonna go over both of the tools today and see why one tool might be better than the other for you. So what does Shrinkwrap do? Well, in both cases for Shrinkwrap and Shrinkwrap Substitute, they simplify your model. So what it does is it gets rid of a lot of model features that you don't want to see. So we're gonna go into a little bit of the stuff that it does right here. So for both of them, they get rid of holes. So any pockets of air that you have in your part, whether it's hollow or solid, it's going to get rid of it. You're going to get rid of any fillets and chamfers, and what that's going to do is it's going to give you a hard edge. So if you can see in this picture, it's a little small, but you see you have a hole in this tubing right here, and it gets filled up with the shrink wrap tool, and any of the fillets around the edges right here, what used to be smooth, now it's going to turn to a sharp edge. So what it's doing essentially is it's simplifying the assembly to be a little bit more rough around the edges. So now we're going to go into the Shrinkwrap Substitute. Like I said, it does exactly the same thing. Pretty much it gets rid of the holes, gets rid of the chamfers, get rid of the fillets. But the Shrinkwrap tool, what it does is it creates another part for you. When you do the Shrinkwrap Substitute, it's going to create a level of detail within your assembly. So that's two different things. Shrinkwrap makes a part, Shrinkwrap Substitute creates a level of detail. But the workflow for both of them is going to be the same exact thing. So use cases of Shrinkwrap. Yeah, it simplifies your model, but you might be asking yourself, hey, I spent all this time adding all these details, adding all these hole cuts, all these features into my model. Why would I want to simplify it in the first place? So as the poll question suggested, if you're using factory, it's a great source. We have customers come to us all the time and they're like, hey, I have this factory file and it's super big and it takes me like 30, 40 minutes to open. And sometimes when I open it, it just crashes because it's just too big. It's hogging all the memory on Inventor. So what we've done for customers, like, hey, instead of having your real assets in your factory design suite, instead of using those real assets, let's simplify them. Let's get rid of all the hole cuts, all the fillets, all the voids, everything. Make it as simple as possible, while it's still going to look exactly like what you're placing, and it's going to have the same boundary conditions, so you know exactly if you're going to have any interference when you put things down. That's a great way to do it, because when we do it this way, you can place 10 times more parts compared to when you're placing your actual assets. But while you have everything a lot smaller, it's going to respond faster in Inventor. You're going to have a faster response time. Cool. If you have any questions about that, go ahead and type them in. We're going to keep on going forward though right now. Another thing is, just say you want to send files to your customer. but you're worried about, hey, I have some information I don't want to share with my customer on this case, you can simplify the model and send it to them. And then if they're doing FEA analysis, whether it's in ANSYS or in Nastran, your test is when you do your studies, they're just as accurate, depending on what studies you do. If you're doing some type of like vibration studies and you just need the general shape, it will be able to get that study pretty much just as accurate. And it'll probably go through a little bit faster because you don't have to worry about it doing the studies on like little hole features or little fillets that might be negligible to your calculations. And like I said, a little thing that sometimes you're working with your customers and your customer's like, hey, can you share me the CAD file, whether it's the part or the drawing? What you could do is you could be like, oh, shoot, I want to share with my customer, but I have some really critical data that I can't share with anyone. It's like specific to my company. What you could do is you could use the Shrinkwrap tool, and then you can get rid of all the important things that you don't want your customers to see, whether it's features or like specific angles of items that you don't want your customer to be stealing your information. You can use Shrinkwrap, simplify it, create a drawing for them, or even send them that part so they could play around with it. Alrighty, so this is it for the presentation. Does anyone have any questions at the moment, Marcella?
I don't see anything yet. We have
Alrighty.
quite a few participants though, about 74.
Cool. Thanks for everyone to joining. If anyone joined late, we're going to be going over Shrinkwrap right here. I have an assembly up in Inventor. If you guys have questions, feel free to stop me anytime. We'll get those answers for you. All right. Like I said, we're in an assembly environment right now. Under the Assemble ribbon, you're going to see a little window right here that says Simplification. You have Shrinkwrap and Shrinkwrap Substitute. So if I go ahead and press it, you're going to see I have components, features, create on the window. For the Shrinkwrap, if I open up the Shrinkwrap Substitute, it's the same exact thing. So if I go ahead and open up the Shrinkwrap, you're going to see that window that I showed in my presentation. You can remove features, right? You have the option to remove, do not remove any of the holes. Maybe you want the holes there. You can remove all the holes, or you have an option that you could say, hey, if my hole is less than half an inch, let's close them up. But anything bigger than half an inch, let's keep them open. You have the same for the fillets. If the radius is a certain thing, if it's under a certain radius, then keep it. If not, get rid of it. All the same for the pockets and the chamfers. And then when you're ready, you can go ahead, save your name of your file, the location, and then you have two options. You can use a standard part or you can use a sheet metal. I'm just going to be using standard parts for all my demos today. And then down here is the styles. This is the only way that you're going to see a little bit of variances between your shrink wraps. You have 4 styles here. You have single solid body merging out seams between planar faces. So what that means is, like, if you go into the model, I'm going to zoom up here on the side. Like between this pipe right here and this one, there's going to be a seam if you simplify it. So if you don't want that seam, you choose this first option right here. You won't see a line there. The second one, you're going to see the seam when you simplify it. The last one, everything is going to be its own body. So like when you create a part, you could extrude stuff as its own separate body, and then it will keep it like that. And then the last one is a single composite, so like a surface. I haven't seen too many people use the surface one, but it just imports as a surface, just like when you import an external CAD data that's not native to Inventor, it comes in the surface, similar to that. So I've already went ahead and done the shrink wrap right here for you guys, so you guys can see the differences, and then we'll jump into the example. So here you have a single body keeping the seams. So like I said, you see between these, you're going to be able to see the seam right here in between the parts, and you're going to see that throughout the whole entire thing. And you see when I simplified it, the whole pockets are gone, the fillets are gone. So it's as simple as possible. This thing is a cylinder now. So now we're going to jump over to the individual solid bodies. So let's go back to the first one. You see how this one's only a single solid body? So it grabs everything at the same time. If I open up the individual solid bodies, you're going to see up here I have 61 solid bodies. So it picks up everything as its own thing. And then you have the no seam options. So if you look at the top, you see between these two now, everything's all joined together. You have no seams compared to this one. This one has the seams. Alrighty, now that you
Justin,
see,
are you ready for a question?
yeah, sure. Let's bring it up. Let's see them.
Okay, Kent had a couple of questions. He asked, instead of using shrink wrap, I've been starting a new part and then deriving the assembly. I can then rederive and control the parts that are included. Does this put me in the same place as shrink wrap?
So that's actually another version of model simplification, right? So it just depends what you start off with, Kent. In this case, my company gave me this assembly right here, and they want me to simplify it from this assembly. If you have a part and then you're deriving it from the assembly, it works almost the same exact way. So it just depends what you want to start with and then how you want to get to your model simplification.
He continues with, often I need to calculate filled in volume of an assembly for buoyancy estimates.
So
does this fairly well, not perfectly. Can shrink wrap do a similar thing?
So yeah, like if you were looking at the shrink wrap window right here, if you have the features, if you care about the pockets within your part, you could say like, hey, if the pockets are under this size, go ahead and get rid of them because that's going to be negligible. But if your pockets are huge and you really care, like for example, we have a tank right here pretty much for brewing. If you care about this being completely empty, you could set the pocket sizes in here.
Okay, great. We do have another question, unless you wanted to continue going on with the presentation.
Yeah, so Emerson, I see your question. We'll get to that, okay? I'll show you exactly what it's going to look like. So for shrink wrap, then one of the methods you see here, we feature, just say I want to get rid of everything right here. I'll run through it real quick on this one. We're just going to name this test 1. And then you have two options. You could preview it. It takes a little bit of time to run. And then you can see a preview before you create it. So when you do that, when you get shrink wrap from an assembly to a part, you only get one shot pretty much. One shot in the sense that, hey, if you go back, you're like, oh shoot, I actually wanted to change the fillet. You have to go back to your assembly again and fix all of that before you keep on going forward. So sometimes it is good to preview. If you preview it and you see exactly what you like, go ahead and create it. If not, you can exit out the preview, make your changes, and then keep on going. So here, give me a second right now as it's generating the preview for us. And you see how my model changes right here. You see how you can see based on my options, I chose the option with no seams, so there's no seams there. And then it got rid of all the fillets, all the holes, just like I said. Right? And if you're okay with it, go ahead and press OK. If not, you can go ahead and press cancel and do it. And then make any of the changes that you need to make.
And Kent has a comment on that. He says that is why derive sounds better. You don't just get one shot.
Yes, that's true too. So when you once you pretty much create your part, then you have to go back to your assembly. But if you only use the preview tool, you can actually use the preview tool to see what you're going to see in the part level and then decide if you're ready to go on or not. Alrighty, so that's one of the methods right there, using just the shrink wrap. And then once you get to the shrink wrap part, you have a simplified model, but here I'll go ahead and pull up the sizes for you, Emerson. So I have, let me find my main assembly. Let me delete something for you so it's easier to see.
I'll read Emerson's question for everybody. Emerson says, can you please tell us the size bytes of each of these shrink wraps and the size of the original file?
Yeah, so right here, my assembly is 973 kilobytes. It's not that big actually, so that's good. So it shouldn't take too long to build, but usually these are in like megs. We get like 50,000 megs. I've seen assemblies up to over 125,000 megs. It's huge, right? But right now it's 973 kilobytes, and that's just the assembly file itself. It doesn't take into account any of the other parts that could be in here. So like if you have like this left cross tube, all that stuff right here, the angle supports, it doesn't take into account that. So depending on what those parts are, it adds up as well. So once I create those different shrink wraps, you might be confused. Like you're looking at this and you're like, hey, why are these file sizes getting even bigger? And the reason behind that is because if you go over to the files and you expand this right here, it still has that dependency on that assembly. So what we want to try to do is we want to try to break that link, because once you break the link between the assembly, it's going to shrink your file size dramatically, like by 10 times even. So if I break it right now, since I don't have any solids showing what this is, right now it's just like, this is pretty much just like a level of detail. So if you want to go ahead and put this into a drawing and then do your dimensions off that, yeah, you lost all your major features. That's very possible to do. But also if you're trying to, if your main goal is like, hey, I need to get file size down because I'm trying to use factory, for example, then we have to go a different route. You have to either in here in your part level, you can create solids. So you can create these rectangles here, and then you could put everything together, or you could do this method right here, which is what I'm going to show you right now. So under simplification, you can expand it right here, and we could define the envelopes. So what defining the envelopes do is it will show you how to make simple cylinders and squares out whatever geometry you have here. So like I said, you could do this after you do the shrink wrap process in the part level, or we could do it at the assembly level and save you a little bit of time. It's pretty intelligent if you look at it actually. So right here, you have the option between choosing a square or a cylinder bounding box. So right now, let's just choose my box. So if I choose this pipe right here, you're going to see how it changes, how it has a hard edge now. It gets rid of the void in there. So if I go ahead and press the plus, you're going to see it change this one and this one right here. It tries to change as many of the same part in there as possible. So if I go ahead and press this one now, it's the same thing. You see how it pops up as a full box right here. It's going to change that to look like a box. Doesn't mean that that geometry isn't there. It's still there, but it's the box is overlaid on top of that. So one thing I have been doing a lot is I was just okay. And the thing is that if you have to shrink wrap a lot of stuff, you don't want to press OK. Keep on pressing that little plus sign right there, and they'll keep on adding to your envelopes. And you can see right here as well on the side, we're starting to get envelopes in the model browser. So like this angle iron right here, I know it's not a box, but it pretty much takes up the same geometry as a box, right? So it's pretty much good enough. Maybe you don't want your customers to know that, hey, we're using angle iron here. So go ahead and define it as a box. And you can see if I switch to a cylinder, it's going to define it as a cylinder. So from the biggest end to this, it takes up the biggest geometry size that it could possibly take up to cover up your angle iron in this case. So I'm just going to keep it as a box, and I'm going to slowly go through all of this and then try to simplify this whole entire model. And then you're going to see here, you see how it defines it as a box because that's the smallest box that it could choose in order to enclose this brewing, right? But in this case, we could choose a cylinder, and it'll pretty much take the entire envelope of that size right there. So I go ahead and add that. You're going to see that all three of these change. Right here is a little panel right here for a motor, but I don't want to take up the whole thing. I only want to take up that little rectangle sheet right there. The bounding box, you see how it automatically updates. And then some stuff like this, you have this right here, and it's really complex. What are you going to do? You're going to make it a box? You're going to make it a square? It's just really up to you. Right here, it looks like a motor with a stand at the bottom of it. So instead of making it a whole box, like if I select it, I kind of want to make it look more like what it is. So maybe it's a cylinder. And then sometimes when you do that, the geometry does stick out the back. It's not too big of a deal. Your goal here is just to simplify as much as you can without losing what the shape is pretty much. You know, you can just define it like, hey, that's a little motor right there connected to a little plate to hold it up. So something a little bit more drastic is if, for example, you have this handlebar here. I can't get this shape with this defined envelope tool in the assembly. If that's something super critical and you're like, hey, my customer needs to see that, instead of defining it right now, go into your part after you do the shrink wrap, and then you can model that out. But stuff like this, it does take a lot of, the file size does go up when you do stuff like this. So just say for my example, I'm just going to make it a box. And it represents the boundary conditions, because maybe you're trying to put this somewhere this is critical, that you know how tall this handle is.
Justin, Michael has a question along that line. He asks, is there any file size differences depending on your selections in the Shrinkwrap tool?
Yeah, yes and no. Mainly yes, actually, because you want to simplify as much as you can. If you don't simplify as much as you can, then you're going to have to create the geometry in the part level. And then when you create that geometry in the part level, maybe it'll take a little bit more detail, whether it's this, there's not going to be squares and circles. There might be not boxes and cylinders. You might have to use a little bit something more complex. The more complex features you have, this file size does end up going up. So in this, using this method right here, I'm trying to simplify as much as I can while still trying to keep the overall geometry accurate. All right, Marcel, let me go through this right here, and then we'll go ahead and keep on answering questions after I do the shrink wrap.
Sounds good.
All right, so stuff like this, get the cylinder there. And let's just say everything is pretty much there. I have 90% of what I want there. Let me double check. You can just hover and you can see like it turns green, like, hey, we could simplify this for you. So I want to simplify as much as I can so we can get a good reading for you guys. Oh, another neat thing. So let me simplify this real quick. So we're just going to make it bigger than what it is, but just so we know. If I wanted to use, let's say, I wanted to do this, but I wanted to go all the way out here instead of where it's at right now, what I could do is I could select this right here, the arrow in which directions you wanted to go to. We could press this button and it'd tell you pretty much this button is like, hey, choose the face on how far you want it to go out. And let's just say I want it to go out all the way over here, right? And that's going to represent this little, the nozzle pretty much, whether it's open or closed. And I don't really care too much about the handle, let's say. So we're going to go ahead and there. And then that's going to take up the geometry all the way through. So down here, I have this little thing is pretty much to release whatever's inside. Let's just say, you know what, I'm going to save that for my part so I can model that. Because if I choose as a cylinder, it doesn't look right. And you see if it's red, that means that it's hitting other geometries that you've already made an envelope of. And then let's just say, like, if I look at it at a box, I don't really like the way the box looks. It doesn't really accurately show what that is. So let's say I'm done with the envelope tube right here. So the only things that I haven't changed so far is this little nozzle right here, or the little handle, and then the drain. Besides that, everything has its own envelope all the way through right here. So if I expand the simplification, I can create a simplified part now. And then you have the same option. The only option that you don't see here when you create a simplified part is creating the surfaces. So you could choose with seams, without seams, or we could maintain each solid as a separate body. So let's say we're going to do as no seams and then single body. So just a little note, if you do it with multiple bodies, your file size is going to be bigger because there's more to compute. If you're trying to do it with seams, just so you know, it's going to take a little bit more file size, but it's not going to be as dramatic. The smallest one you're going to see is no seams, single body. So if file size is all you care about, that's the one you want to do. Okay, and then once you're ready, go ahead and press OK. And right now it's thinking right here. You can see down here it's loading up. And then here it is. You see it comes in as a single part, one body. If you look at the top, there's no seams at all. All right, and you still see it still brings another the other geometry. Like if you think about it, it still has that main assembly underneath the envelopes that we defined right here. And then here, I'll go ahead and bring over the File Explorer right here. You can see it's 3,804 kilobytes, right? It's bigger than what it was before. And that's because it has all these envelopes as well as that assembly underneath holding onto it. So let's just say right now, I want to, let me save it right here in this model state right here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a copy of this right here just so we can see the differences. So I'm just going to call this test 1. And it creates test 1. You're also going to see when you bring it in, look at it, it brings it in at a different orientation on the model cube or the view cube compared to what it was at the assembly, right? The front makes sense. So what you could do is you can actually go back and define it if it bothers you. It bothers me. So I can go ahead and right click it and I can set the current view as front. So now if I go up here, I can right click it and I can set this current view to home. So now it's back in the same model orientation as it was at the assembly. So here for my test 1, let's just say I want to break. Let's say I just want to break that relationship with the assembly. So if you see here, test 1, I'm at 3,833 kilobytes. If I go ahead and right click it and I delete it, you're going to see all my envelopes stayed. Some of the things I didn't define was down here, the drainage. And then also, like I said, the handlebar, right? So now all that's gone, but I still have my general shape here. It's about 99% accurate, I would say, maybe 90%. So if I go ahead and save test 1, you're going to see down here, test 1 comes in at 489 kilobytes compared to what I had before was 3833. So you see how dramatic that it brought it down, it almost brought it down 10 times. And now we have a super simplified model. And this is what you want to put into your factory asset layout or your factory team layout. You go ahead and do that. All right, so let's go back to this one. Let me go ahead and redefine this so it looks a little bit better. All right, so let's just say, for example, hey, I really need this drain down here. What you can do is you can actually still go in here and sketch it. So I can go down here and I can make a sketch. And then while it's here, you can actually use your measure tool, measure exactly what it is. Like, hey, this radius is 8 inches. So if I'm drawing it, I can say, hey, this is 8 inches, and I can constrain it if I need to project the geometry. We can constrain stuff so it works out. Let's just say it's there for now. And if I extrude it, we could extrude it so it makes sense. Well, this is like 1.5 inch. And then you could choose the option. Do you want to join? Same thing, same old Inventor modeling. And then stuff like that, if you do that, you're going to see it appears here, but it doesn't appear here. So you're going to have to do that for all of them. And as you keep on doing it, it's just going to make your file size a little bit bigger. So as you keep on adding model features, whether it's fillets or whatever it is, it's just going to keep on growing that file size. Make sense? And let's just say, for example, I care about these handles too. Like I said, I can go back in here, start a sketch, what plane it is. If I sketch it on the same exact plane that it's on, once I make that sketch, because I selected the top of this handle right here, just say like, oh, I want it to be this right here. And then I extrude it. The problem if you do it that way is when you break the link, it doesn't understand that you broke the link actually. So it would pretty much make you an unresolved feature. And that's not something you want. So what I would do is in these cases, I would try to make sketches based off of the envelopes that are going to stay. So for example, underneath when I was doing the drain, I wanted to do it to the bottom of the cylinder and actually not what I was trying to get rid of in the assembly level. So that's the main process of shrink wrap. And just say you need a little bit of logic behind this. Like, hey, I still want to be able to control overall length because once we break it from the assembly over here, we don't have parameters. So just say, hey, I want to create lengths and stuff like that. If you go over to 3D model, you can do direct edits. Like you could break stuff in half and then you could scale it if you want it to be bigger, smaller. You can move stuff. You can do all of that with the direct edit tool. But I recommend doing that after you break the link with the assembly, or else it's going to start freaking out. So within, just for example, this test right here, we can go ahead and go into direct edit. And let's say we can move stuff. We can just select what we want to move. And then it'll start updating. If that's something you guys like to see, you guys can suggest that in the next AVA and I can go over that. Because direct editing and making a shrink wrap configurable, that's a whole nother can of worms right there. And all right, last thing, if you guys are mainly concerned only about file sizes, and you're like, hey, just say this was a 100,000 meg file right here, and we got it down to 5,000 megs. It's still 5,000 megs. It's still considerable. It's still a big amount. If that's something that you're still really worried about, like, hey, can I bring it down any more besides that? The last way to do it is, we've done this for our customers, is you can export it. And if you export it, what we recommend is you export it as a SAT file. And what we've noticed is that with all these file structures that you have down here, what's this STL, step, all that stuff, SAT files keeps it the best. So what SAT file does is that if you have solid bodies, multiple solid bodies, it will shrink it all into one solid body. It'll pretty much make everything as simple as possible with a SAT file. So now if I save it, you're going to see over here, I brought it down another, what, about 200 kilobytes. And then you could bring it back into Inventor, opening it up, and then it'll pretty much keep the same file size right there. Alrighty, Marcella, do we have any questions that people are asking?
Yes, we do. Claudio has a couple questions. They're asking, is there any advantage to breaking the link versus suppressing the link between a shrink wrap?
Yeah, so if you want to create model features and then you want to make sure that, hey, I'm getting things in the right place, but you still want the actual assembly link still there so you could reference it, go ahead and suppress it. But if you suppress it, it does not change the file sizing. It's going to keep the file size the same. But if you're using this to create drawings for, so you can keep your intellectual property, you can go ahead and suppress it and then make the drawings based off of that, and then that's perfectly good. It's the same way with the shrink wrap substitute. If you only want a level of detail to create drawings so you can keep send out drawings to customers while protecting your intellectual property, you could do the shrink wrap substitute as well. But if file sizing is the main important thing, like I said, we're trying to put it into factory, or you're just trying to make representational models and lay it out for quotes to make it faster or something like that, I would go ahead and break those links, because keeping that link, it does make it a little bit bigger. And then once you start, if you're making drawings, like big drawing sets of it, or making big assemblies with these simplified models, it just does add up on size, and it's going to make it run a little bit slower.
Okay. Then we also have a question from YouTube. Hello, Justin. I recently came across an issue when I was trying to create shrink wrap substitute in one specific assembly. It throws an error, unable to create a part out of memory.
Go ahead. I'll put my email up later today. You can go ahead and reach out to me. Let's go ahead and see if we can sort that out for you. So I'll go ahead and go back to my PowerPoint right now. If you have questions, or you're running into any issues, or you need help in any way, you go ahead and reach out to us, whether through our Lifeline team, or you can reach out to me directly. You can call us. Let me look into that. Let's see if we can figure that out for you. So here's some of my information right here. That's my email, justin.gao@ketiv.com. That's the KETIV's number. If you want to call, we can set up a call as well. And if you guys want to stay connected, here's my LinkedIn.
And we also have a generic email, support@ketiv.com, that goes to our tech support team as well.
Mm-hmm. And then through there, you can also contact, if you want to get a hold of me, you want to get a hold of anyone at the team, you can go ahead and do that in the email as well. So, but if you want like a general question, there's a lot of things that go wrong with shrink wrap. Sometimes it doesn't understand some of the numbers that you put in, some of the constraints that you want to get out of it, Or sometimes it's just like your system's too old, whether it might be your computer's old or you don't have enough memory, it can't compute it. So there's a lot of background issues to that. That's a very, very broad question.
Okay. Jim has a comment. He says in the components tab, removing parts by size can be a significant help in reducing the file size. I use this a lot.
Yep, definitely. Wait, so this is using the Shrinkwrap tool is one form of model simplification. There's thousands of ways you could simplify a model. I know there wasn't a lot of information out on Shrinkwrap actually doing like YouTube searches or anything like that. So that's why we came up with this AVA, show you one method of that. I think a couple weeks ago, another one of my colleagues probably did a model simplification, what I think maybe even a year ago. So if that's something you're interested in, model simplification, we have a few videos on our KETIV AVA YouTube page.
Okay, and George also had a comment from YouTube. He was saying this was how Minecraft was made. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, it's pretty much, right? It's make blocks, right? Make everything as simple as possible, pixelated, but it runs smooth, right? Minecraft runs super smooth.
Yep.
So I see Claudio, he has a question here. What's the most effective workflow for tuning a large assembly into a collection of shrink wraps to make handling the large assembly easier? Better to use shrink wrap substitute level of detail or to build the large assembly from individual shrink wrap parts? So it depends, Claudio. If you have a very, very large assembly and it's consisted of sub-assemblies, you can go ahead and shrink wrap those sub-assemblies. And then after you have all your sub-assemblies shrink wrap, you could use those shrink wrap parts to make a simplified assembly model, if that makes sense. Or that's one option, but then you have a bunch of parts to make up one large assembly. Your other option is you could simplify that large assembly as one entire shrink wrap part, like the method I just went through right now. So there's a couple different ways to approach that, and that's when we have our customers reach in about like, hey, things are taking too long to load. What do you recommend? And if shrink wrap is the method for them, it really just depends what they're looking for. If you want to keep those sub assemblies like that, so if you create like a bill of material, for example, you want to see in the bill of material those specific line items, then yeah, we would go ahead and tackle it that way. But if you're using it as like in a factory, for example, you want to use that as an asset, going at it with a single part, that's a great way to go.
Okay, great. And Kelly says, if items are shrink wrapped, can they be unshrink wrapped later in the model? Looking to help reduce regeneration time in model generation.
So no, actually, yes, it depends actually. So if you're in the part, right, and just like you want to bring the fillets back, yeah, you can go ahead and go in there and use the fillet tool and create all the fillets on all the edges that you want after you shrink wrap. But if you're trying to go back and then like just like, oh, I actually need these holes of air pockets, stuff like that. I know there was a question earlier like about buoyancy and just like, oh shoot, I need to change the buoyancy. It'll probably be better if you go back to your main assembly and then shrink wrap again with the right constraints, because just in case, just say you need it for multiple stuff, right? Just say you do need one for factory asset, you need one for FEA, and then you also need one to create drawings. If you have 3 requirements and that all the requirements are different for each case that you choose, it might be best just to create 3 shrink wrap models and then call it a day. But Kelly, to your question, it really just depends where you're trying to go with that. But if you need help or recommendation or guidance, feel free to reach out. We can get that answered for you.
Okay, thanks. Question from YouTube. We have, I also noticed when we select remove chamfers and fillets while creating shrink wrap, it results with a huge triangle edges. Any tips on this?
So I guess in regards to that, are you talking about how like you get like, are you talking about these triangle edges? Like you get hard 90-degree angles whenever you get rid of chamfers or fillets. The only way, if you're trying to say like, hey, I want to keep some fillets, if you go over back to the assembly and you use the shrink wrap and then go to features, you could select like, hey, the max radius is 10 inches. Just say for fillets, right? Just like, oh, anything over 5, I want to get rid of. You could do stuff like that if that's some of the fields that you want to keep. Or if you just say like, hey, I want to get rid of all the fillets, but one fillet's over 5 inch and I want to keep that actually. Just get rid of all the fillets, and then once the fillets are all gone, go ahead and go back to your part, and then just like, oh shoot, I need to add just this fillet right here. Be way better than just to say like, oh man, keep all of it and remove them later.
Yeah, and I'm also being told that instead of removing these features completely, try and remove them by specifying your feature size with a maximum value or less.
Yep, that's exactly what it is right there. So under features, you could define the sizes. You see all these text boxes started to light up once you press them. You could define the size. If you're looking for something super specific, like, hey, I want to make sure all chamfers are there, go ahead and remove it. Or just like, I want to keep chamfers under 1 inch because those are very minimal. Just like I said, larger fillets, larger holes, larger pockets, all that stuff. If you don't get rid of them, they just add size. If size is your main thing, go ahead and remove them, but you can define what you keep. Small little stuff, they don't add up that much. Just say you want 2 or 3 fillets on a model. That's okay. It's not going to hurt you. But if you're like, oh, you know what? I want to keep the model almost the same thing, just get rid of the pockets. So let's say I want to keep all chamfers, all fillets, all holes, but I want to remove all the pockets. Right here, remove all the pockets. You're not going to get that much. Your file size is going to shrink, but it's not going to shrink dramatically.
Looks like we have someone, Franco, maybe from Italy, or he's Italian because he says grazie. Is it preferable to use replacement models or simplified derived parts?
So what I was doing was after I define my envelopes, I create a simplified part. Is that what you're referring to, Franco? If you have replacement models, just say like you already have like a cylinder modeled, you can go ahead and replace this component in here, and then it'll pretty much get the same job done. Or if you just want to model that, you can model that as well. The workflow that we're going is just a general workflow for Shrinkwrap. If you do have stuff like you have to simplify on your own, then that's a different story. That's a different workflow that we have to tackle.
Okay, and then you'll see if he responds to that. And Steven says, how do you shrink wrap parameter-driven assets for factory?
Yeah, so Steven, that's actually something that we had to tackle for our customer. And that's after I simplified my part in the assembly, like just say I had a lot of parameters driving everything, like I do here. I have some parameters, like I have height, offset, stuff like that. Just say like, hey, you still want to be able to control all of that. You're going to have to go back to your part right here, and then this direct edit tool right here is going to be your best friend. Like I can go ahead and start splitting stuff. So just say like I need this thing to go over in the negative X direction, 10 degrees. I can use this direct edit tool to link parameters and get things to change accordingly. You are going to be a little bit more limited depending on which option you choose. Just say like you wanted bodies to be movable. Right here, I have everything as a solid body. That will influence what option you choose when you choose model simplification. You might want to keep everything as a solid body so you can keep on moving it. But if that's something you're interested in, go ahead and we have a survey that's coming out at the end. At the end of every AVA, we have a survey. Go ahead and put that in. That's something we can get to on the next AVA. All right. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free, reach out to us here at KETIV. You can do a Google search. You can get our number there. And if you're looking for something specific, go ahead and get in touch with us and we could answer any question, whether it's for your company or for you personally. We don't mind taking a look into that. All right, everyone, stay safe out there. And then we'll see you on next Thursday.
All right. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye.